If I step back and kind of looked at everything in totality, it just gets overwhelming, right? So I just take little chunks and I say, okay, this is what we're working on now.
Just a quick reminder for you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better.
Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. Today, I'm with Jeff Davis, President and CEO of Sheffield Pharmaceuticals. Jeff, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
You're welcome. It's the Made in America podcast, Jeff. So we always start off with the same two questions. What do you make and why do you make it?
So we make pharmaceuticals, so over-the-counter pharmaceuticals and some prescription pharmaceuticals. Things like creams and ointments and liquids, so nasal sprays, triple antibiotic, Neosporin type products, toothpaste, kind of what we're known for. And why do we do it? Well, we want to make people's lives better.
That's a pretty good simplistic reason why that I bet a lot of people could get behind. Mm-hmm. And Jeff, we've got a lot to cover. Certainly you have a very diversified business. It's changed a lot in the 170 years or something.
Yep.
It's been around. And so I think we got a lot of interesting stuff to cover that people will really kind of latch on to. Reinvention, as I mentioned, diversification, all the stuff you guys are doing, modernization, investment, so we can get to all that. But let's kind of start back from the beginning. I referenced how old the business is. So can you just help the audience kind of get centered around what is the Sheffield Pharmaceuticals story?
Sure. So Sheffield Pharmaceuticals was actually started by Dr. Washington Wentworth Sheffield. He was a dentist and he was a dental surgeon back in the mid 1800s, New London, Connecticut. In fact, my office is in his house, his original house. Yes, his original dental office and house. So Dr. Sheffield started out and as I said, was a dentist and a dental surgeon. But back then, people used tooth powders. Everybody's kind of heard of tooth powders. Yep. He came up with an innovative idea and said, well, instead of a powder, which you have to mix with water, why don't I just pre-mix it and make a cream or a paste? And he did that. And he gave it to his patients, and his patients loved it and said, you really should start selling this. And that was, he's credited with the inventor of being the inventor of toothpaste. And so he continued along. He was selling his toothpaste in jars. And then his son was going to dental school in Paris, actually. And his son saw painters, along the Seine, I guess, painting, and they had the tubes of paint. That's how paint was packaged. And he said to himself, well, what a great idea to put my father's toothpaste in a tube. And that's exactly what they did. And not only is he the inventor of toothpaste, but that was really the first personal care type product in a tube. And, so he's credited with inventing toothpaste and the first person to put toothpaste in a tube.
That's
before Colgate or anybody.
Right? That's wild.
Big innovation, right?
Yeah, that is a huge innovation. And actually, I didn't know about, shockingly, I've got a lot of dentists in my family who, when they hear this, are going to be surprised or maybe not that surprised that I maybe wasn't listening at the time. But
right.
So before Sheffield's toothpaste, you had a powder? You had to make your toothpaste yourself?
Yeah. So, people would either dip their brush in the powder or mix the powder with water. You can still buy tooth powders, actually.
Really?
Yeah. one of the big trends over the past few years was charcoal powder. And people would brush their teeth with charcoal.
That sounds terrible.
So, yeah, it is. It makes a big mess. But I don't know. People are still doing it. It's still out there. So
wow. So we go from the invention of toothpaste and toothpaste in a tube. And so where does the kind of business go from there?
So then it became a business. It wasn't, Dr. Sheffield's dental office. It really became the New England Tube Company. So they really leaned into this idea that, goods should be packaged in tubes, and they built a facility to make aluminum tubes. Also still fill toothpaste mostly at that time, back in the late 1800s. So the company was really built as a New England tube company making aluminum tubes, selling them to everybody, all the big CPG companies at the time. And it became a pretty big company. They had offices in, I think, Paris and London, New York. We have all the old advertising. That's the great thing about, we're on the same site, Again, Dr. Sheffield's house, the factory was built around the house. We're still there. So we have all that advertising and recipes and all, so it was really interesting. But so the company grew to be fairly large and successful. And, right up through the 80s, their big business was making aluminum tubes, also producing some filled products. But
for 130 years, so sounds like the business really. So the initial innovation was the toothpaste,
right?
Then it was the toothpaste delivery system. Yep. But interestingly, what really built the business wasn't really the toothpaste. It wasn't even necessarily the toothpaste business itself. It was going, hey, we now know how to make these tubes and fill it with consumer goods, not paint, and we can sort of sell that innovation technology really to other businesses. And so basically would they fill the tubes for other people, or they were just selling empty tubes?
They did some, but they also sold empty tubes too.
And that was the primary business.
That was the primary business for many years.
And so we did that for 130 years or something like that.
The 80s, yeah. Sheffield family still owned it in the 80s.
And so what happened in the 1980s?
Well, they went bankrupt. I mean, obviously innovation kind of stalled there. They didn't modernize the factory. They didn't really look to other lines of business. And by the 80s, obviously aluminum tubes, plastic in the 60s and 70s, plastic started coming in. And everything started being packaged in plastic because it was cheaper, it was more durable, easier to transport. Because, aluminum tubes are very soft. They get a dent, and then all of a sudden they don't run that good. They were stagnant, really. And the company was sold out of bankruptcy in the 80s to the same family that owns it now. The patriarch of the family bought it in the 80s.
And so the business clearly had to some extent run its course.
Right.
I think you made the point that there was a big innovation, and then they sort of rode that innovation actually for a really, really long time.
It was a good run.
It was a very good run, sort of riding that horse. But to your point, sounds like a combination of technology moving on its own,
right.
i.e., a better mousetrap, as it were, sort of coming out, and then combine that with lack of sort of reinvestment in the business. You sort of end up in a cul-de-sac, in a dead end.
Natural progression might have been, okay, let's make plastic tubes now. Right. We have a certain expertise, but they didn't do that.
They didn't do that. So the family that bought it in the 80s out of bankruptcy, and I know they still own it today, so you probably have the history on this. Like, what was the thesis of getting the business out of bankruptcy? Like, what prompted them to say, hey, let's make a go of it?
So it was an individual, his name was Thomas G. Faria, and he owned another local business. And, he was a local guy, had grown up in the area. And I think, I never had deep discussions with him about it. I did work with him for a while. But I think really from his perspective, that was a big employer in town in New London. By the 80s, New London was getting fairly economically depressed. And I think he just wanted to try to keep it going, for the town and the area. It was a big employer. He didn't want to see him go away. But he was a smart enough guy. He was very smart, and he realized, well, we can't keep making tubes.
Right.
This is not going to work. But what he did see is, boy, this kind of smaller part of the business where we're actually filling things into tubes. Well, maybe there's something there. And so that's really when Sheffield Pharmaceuticals was born. And
was it called the New England Tube Company until the 80s?
It was still called Sheffield Industries.
Okay.
There was the New England Tube Company, Sheffield Industries, Sheffield Laboratories was really I think where it was in the 80s, that was the name. And that's the name that carried on from there, Sheffield Laboratories.
So the Sheffield name really stood the test of time.
Yes,
in terms
it
of
did.
people knew about that it was Sheffield, and that was sort of.
I think there was always a two-prong. There was Sheffield Industries or Sheffield Laboratories and the New England Tube Company.
Got it.
So,
so the thesis is, I see this business. We got a whole bunch of stuff losing money.
Right.
We're not going to make it. But maybe there's a diamond inside of all this.
Right. Maybe there's a way to salvage this thing, and they didn't stop making tubes. Now I didn't get to Sheffield till the mid '90s. And by the time I got there, tube making had largely ceased. But, for 8 or 9 years, they still did make some tubes, sometimes just for what they were producing themselves. But I still think they did, for a period of time, sell to other customers. And the business started growing as a, personal care, a lot of toothpaste was what they were originally doing, and then into the pharma side. But that was a long progression. It took many years to build that business, that pharmaceutical business, because it's obviously heavily regulated. You need a lot of infrastructure to maintain that regulatory.
When you say regulatory, you're talking about sort of if you're doing anything that someone's going to ingest or use on their body,
Right. Food,
even if it's over the counter, you're still saying even
FDA regulated.
Yeah, even over the counter stuff is still. Yeah.
Oh yeah, over the counter is not much different from prescription products in that, and how you make them and how you test them. And, they're not necessarily less, less tested than a prescription product.
Right, it's still going in your body one way or the other.
The difference in prescription products is the drug development. Obviously, that's a whole other thing, which we don't do.
Right.
But no, over-the-counter drugs, they're still heavily regulated. You got to have all your ducks in a row. And it took a long time.
So I want to get to the business pivoting, but you commented that you sort of arrived in the 90s. So let's just touch on that before we get back to the rest of the business. So you show up in the 90s, manufacturing background?
Yeah, as I grew up, we had a family pharmaceutical company. So that kind of was my background to get in here. So we did solid dose tablets, not generally creams or ointments or things like that. But, it's the same business.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
Again,
Delivery system's a little bit
the
different.
regulatory side of it is really the what you got to wrap your hands around.
So was that the thought process of you coming in, was bringing in some of that expertise to help?
So I came in there running the production departments, basically. I'm an operations guy. That's my background.
Got it.
Yeah.
So kind of keep walking us through the transition, because I think that's, to me, is like one of the most interesting stories is how this business has sort of reinvented itself. So they started to get into pharmaceuticals, really, again, almost like going back to roots, right? Because you started, I don't know if toothpaste is technically a pharmaceutical or not.
It is.
It is,
fluoride.
right?
Yep.
Okay, right. So it goes. So you're kind of going back to the beginning here. Tell us the story. Like, how did the company build back from there?
So, again, it was a slow process. You have to build a whole quality team. God, when I started there in the 90s, there was 3 or 4 people in quality. Now it's 25% of the company. You have to develop those formulas. You have to, and you do that over time, basically. So when I first started, the business was primarily doing what we call, private label and contract manufacturing. So contract manufacturing is if somebody has a brand, they don't produce, we make it for them.
So they're R&D, design, sales, and marketing.
Well, sometimes we do the R&D for them, but they're generally marketing companies. They do the marketing, sometimes product development, sometimes we help. It depends on the customer.
Got it.
So, and then there was the private, label side, or, we also call it our control brand, where we have our name, at one time it was Dr. Sheffield's, but it was a whole range of creams and ointments, hydrocortisone cream and, toothpaste too. And we also do that for big chains like CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, Target. We do those same products in their label. So Walmart Equate, CVS, Health, wellness at Walgreens, all those things we do. So that was primarily what we were doing. We didn't, have our own brand per se, because, the Dr. Sheffield brand was, again, we call it a control brand. It was a generic of, a Neosporin or a Cortisone 10 or something like that. We didn't do a lot of, I don't think we did any prescription product when I first started. Maybe we did one prescription toothpaste. But, again, that was on a contract manufacturing basis. And, that was kind of the business. It was, and it went on like that for a while. Really, for many years until about, 2014, 2016 when I took over. we started really focusing on trying to diversify our product lines.
And what was sort of the thought process there in trying to make that transition? Was the first path getting away from the aluminum tubes, understanding that sort of over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, whether that was your own control brand or making it for somebody else, but really that seemed like a niche you fell into that had some leg, at least some sustainable legs to it, but it doesn't sound like it had sort of rocket ship growth. It had survivability, but maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, am I reading that right?
You're reading that right. It's, you kind of incrementally, organically grow. There was a lot of competition really at that time, more so than now, because the regulatory environment 30 years ago was not as stringent as it is now. So the guy in his garage was doing stuff that, the guy in his garage cannot make drugs anymore. I mean, can for a while until the FDA comes knocking.
Right.
So it was, it was not a rocket ship hockey stick growth model. But we did grow, from bankruptcy.
Well, yeah.
And,
To viability, at least.
Viability over that period of time. And the business, grew a lot, over, even the 10 years by the time I got there. And, we still have this in us. But really back then it was kind of Yankee ingenuity. The individual, Tom Faria, was an engineer. He manufactured a lot of his own equipment, or tried to, modified a lot of things, tried to drive efficiency into that process that was really inefficient when he took the business over. And installed, a lot of different mixing systems and things like that, and really did it in a way that was, he was well off. But this was not a billionaire. He did it in a way that was manageable, all on his own. He wasn't taking in outside capital. He was everything
bootstrapping the heck out of this thing.
Bootstrapping the heck out of it. Yeah.
That's good. Kudos to him, man. Kudos to him. So what was the pivot 2014? You mentioned 2014, 2016. So now we're like kind of going to like another pivot. What was that? What was sort of the change in thesis there? And how did you guys?
One thing about, the company had grown, and as I said, tried to do a lot of things internally and build our own equipment. And there really wasn't a lot of reinvestment into the company. When it came to automation or new processes or new product development, so the company was really underinvested in for a long time, which was almost a necessity.
Right. Yeah.
So so when I took over, what I saw was a lot of low hanging fruit. Like then. We didn't have a big investor coming in. It was whatever we can do with our P&L, and make these investments. That's what we were going to do. With the support of the current owners, family, we made significant investments in automation, new capabilities, and because again, it was low hanging fruit to me. It was. Because I came from an operations background, it was really easy for me to look at it and quantify, okay, this makes absolute sense. We have to take on, we have to invest a lot of money to do it, but it's going to pay off in the end. And it certainly did.
So I'm going to ask you some detailed questions on that. First one is, it's kind of unique, I think, for someone who's been in the business for a long period of time to be able to find that low-hanging fruit, like the way you're talking about it. I wonder if you could talk a little bit of that. My experience is, when someone comes in new, they have this outside experience. They've seen it done where they've been before. They come in, they look at the new company that they're joining, and they're like, hey, I've seen it done this way and this way and this way. But by the time you're at this point, you've been with the company almost 20 years. So how did you kind of get an outsider's perspective after being such an insider?
I don't think it was as much of an outsider's perspective. It was, the company really was... he was an entrepreneur, and he kind of fostered that among everybody, because, we all wore a lot of hats. I came in to run production departments, but, it's a small company. You do anything and everything you need to do. I had the regulatory background because I knew the business already. I spent 15 years kind of seeing that low hanging fruit, I'd always advocated for it, but there just wasn't a lot of appetite to make those sorts of investments. And I don't think I don't think you always need a fresh perspective to see those things. You just need somebody who knows the business and knows what's possible. And that happened to be me at that time. And as I grew with the business, so I've never been one of those people that well, this is the way we do it, and that's the only way we do it. In fact, you really fight against that in a lot of businesses. So I was able to look at that, and again, it was low hanging fruit. We didn't need a consultant to come in and tell us.
What kind of? Give me a couple of examples of like
just automating a process that it was a line. You automate the line, and instead of having 6 people, now you've got 2. I mean, it's really simple math, and it's what you need to do to service the debt. To again, everything was financed by the P&L. It wasn't. We didn't have angel investors coming in. So we did it incrementally and organically, and we still maintained that infrastructure that allowed us to do a lot of the things that we used to. We have an engineering department. We have a large shop that can do welding and pipe fitting, and CNC milling machines and 3D printers, and automation technicians. We really continued to build that team, and that helped us, do these things. Because, installing automation sounds easy, right? Well, you just buy something, you slam it in there and start running the next day. It's never that easy.
No. You got to kind of re-engineer.
Particularly in our business, because it's, everything is custom made, Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, the machine that takes the tube and puts it into a carton, that used to be done by hand. So, okay, it's a standard machine you buy that, it's a range of machines that do this, but you've got all sorts of different formats and cartons, and it's got to integrate with your other pieces of equipment differently. So it's, again, it's not you buy it, you stick it in, and you're running the next day. It's an effort. So
it's funny. I was just reading an article. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal that was just talking about, thinking about just AI and robotics and automation in general in manufacturing. I was just talking about the idea that a lot of times we don't appreciate how something that we think of as so simple that you just talked about putting a tube in a carton, like you say it out loud and it sounds like, yeah, you should be able to get a robot to do that.
No problem, right?
Do that, no problem. But there's like a million small decisions and a small little tweaks that
Absolutely.
For a person just happen automatically. But when you need to program it, it's like exponentially more difficult than you would think.
Well, I just read an article about Stanley. They're building a factory. Did you read this?
Yeah, I just did.
Yeah,
the factory that
they
closed.
spent how many tens of millions of dollars because they were going to automate this process? Didn't work.
Yeah.
They couldn't get it to work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy, right? But that's what happens.
Yeah, well, and that goes back to the point, right? That's just a lot more complicated than you think it is. So what kind of automation, what kind of dollars are we talking about in terms of investment?
Well, since 2014, probably $12+ million just on equipment. Never mind, we did some other things there. We bought a warehouse. We, made a lot of changes. Big investment in the company over the past, certainly over the past 5 or 6 years. So that's when we really, kicked it up. But
that doesn't even, and then I'd be behind the hard costs, right? There's going to be like training, process re-engineering.
Yeah, I mean that's just that's just strictly capital cost. Never mind the rest of it.
Yeah.
And again, pharmaceutical business, it's heavily regulated. Everything's got to be validated, and it's a process. It's a process. So.
And so now looking back on it, how you felt about the ROI on those investments?
Well, I'm feeling great about it, and because my line now is again, I started this really in 2016 when I took over, and my line is, well, if I had hindsight or foresight rather, and somebody told me we're going to have a pandemic, COVID's coming, you're not going to be able to hire anybody. There's going to be supply chain issues, what would you do? And I kind of would do exactly what I did, because if I hadn't done that, 2020 comes and, we used to need 40 more people to run that factory, at a revenue level that was, you know, 30, 40% less than it is now, we wouldn't have survived it. We couldn't have done it. You know, we would not have been able to get the people. I mean, hiring's still a challenge. So yeah, you know, not only the ROI, you know, again, the ROI is easy to figure out from okay, I needed 5 people or 6 people, now I need 2. Pretty easy to tabulate that, right? But it's not just that. It allowed us to scale the business, which we wouldn't have been able to do with the old equipment. We wouldn't have been able to produce what we can now. And it also allowed us to survive during COVID, which I don't know that we could have, looking back on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting story, Jeff, about like a real case study. I'm talking all the time about the need to invest in modernization and automation. And it's just like, I just was fascinated by the story from the very beginning, because it's such a long story, and it's such an interesting way to look at and how companies can be innovators in their day, maybe lose sight of how being an innovator and staying ahead of the technology is what you need to stay in place, and yet find a way to come back and then in the end start to thrive and prosper and survive a pandemic through the very thing that started the company 170 years earlier.
Well, and it wasn't just automation too. It was how we changed our product line, you know.
So not just how you do what you do, but what you do. So talk a little bit about that. I mean, well, let's get into that a little bit. So
again, we used to, we never had a brand, right? We never had a brand that we would, market. And there was just that control brand, which, didn't get marketed. It just got sold to wholesalers. And there's always a lot of resistance to that. And
to having your own brand.
Yeah, because, I remember having these discussions with ownership, and they were saying, well, we can't do the marketing, and it's just too, we could never do that. And what happens is, so we built this business, and in order to do what we do, even just doing the private brands for stores, and you have to build this infrastructure, formulation, artwork, we have to have graphic artists. I mean, that doesn't come from the customers. You've got to
on their private label brands.
They give you a style guide, but you've got to do the proofs. You got to do the dye lines.
Really?
We buy the packaging. Yeah, we do. We have to do all that. Now it's production art, but it's still, it's art. And so we developed this team that could do all these things. And the first brand we launched really on our own was Dr. Sheffield. Now, we did acquire some brands when we acquired a defunct company in the 2014 era, but they were, like the Seaman brand. It's a good little brand, but that's been around as long as Dr. Sheffield. And it's one of those brands where, you have some loyal customers, but, every time an ambulance goes by, you lose a customer because everybody's 80 who buys it. So we try to revitalize some of those. But really, the Dr. Sheffield toothpaste was the launch. And really, the idea, the genesis of it was my head of sales. He said, you guys have this great history that you're not leveraging. Nobody knows about it. You're
like 95% of the way to your own brand.
Nobody's got a better story.
You got the story. Yeah.
We had these deep retail relations. We do business with the biggest companies in the world. We have relationships with them. Why not try to launch our own brand? And we did it. And that was Dr. Sheffield. We did get it on the retail shelf. We did an exclusive with CVS for a couple of years, which was good. So that kind of created a different profile for the company. And then we went on to, we launched another brand called Theriac. It's a wound care product that's fairly new, sold in Walgreens. And Amazon becomes the perfect outlet to be able to scale sales on these. So, that was one thing we did. Then our prescription business, we have our own prescription label. It's not contract packaging. We don't do it for somebody else. It's our label. It's called Wentworth, Dr. Washington Wentworth Sheffield. And that was born out of, that was doing contract packaging, prescription business was a decent part of our business for other people. And then our 2 largest customers simultaneously declared bankruptcy. Who made this? And I said, why can't we put this, why can't we sell this, put it on our own label? So we're just selling to them. They're marking it up.
Right.
And that's what
cut out the middleman.
That's what we did. We found a great partner to help us with distribution, because prescription distribution is It's very challenging. And navigating that whole world, it's very different than selling into retailers. We developed not only the existing formulas we had, but we developed new formulas. And that's become a big part of our business and the most profitable part of our business. So, kind of what we've done is really, in my mind, reduced our risk because, generally in a recession, we do great because what do we make? We make lower cost alternatives to products people need. But, when things like, COVID happened, if we hadn't built an online business, that would have looked much different for us with our brands. And our brands are sold, obviously, on Amazon. That's the big gorilla in the room. So it really, it diversified us to kind of spread our risk. And now what's happened during COVID is I think a lot of the little guys, I'd say we're a mid-sized company, but a lot of the little smaller companies just really can't do this business anymore. The regulatory bar has gotten so high. A lot of them are just gone. So
opportunity to pick up that business too.
That was COVID was very tough for us. That in 2020 our business was down 50%. I mean that was because where do our products get sold? In retail stores?
If you can't go into CVS or Walgreens.
Our prescription toothpaste launch was that year. What happens? Every dental office shuts down. So it was kind of a perfect storm. So it was challenging, but having the brands that were sold on Amazon, having that presence.
Did you have to develop that? So you had talked about earlier about the idea that before you launched your own brand, you sort of had 90, whatever. I mean, I made up the number, 95%, but you had a huge percentage of the building blocks. You had the graphic designers, you had the packaging, manufacturing, so on and so on. But you now have sort of pivoted and said, hey, a lot of this is being done online. So if you had to sort of learn the digital marketing, because Amazon's great in a lot of ways, but you also got to get found, and that's you know what I mean. Like you go to CVS, you walk to the toothpaste aisle, there's a chance they find you. Getting found on Amazon can be
learning the Amazon ecosystem was a huge challenge. But I had a great guy on my staff who again,
existing person or somebody you went and
he
found?
Was existing. He was
lucky there.
And he was very interested in it. We got a lot of smart people working for us.
There you
go. He said, I want to take this on and I think we can do it. And look, at the beginning, we got help, we got outside agencies to help us. But what we quickly found was, using an outside agency like that, so everybody talks a good game, but the attention they give you as an account is basically, we're going to have our monthly check-in. I better see what Sheffield's doing. You're not going to get the attention you need. Amazon, we found, was really it's got to be a focused effort. You're not just kind of putting things on autopilot and, all of a sudden we're selling bunches of product. There is a definite formula for getting found on Amazon, maintaining your, not only maintaining, but growing your share of the business that, we've now figured out. But it took 3 years. It was not easy to and the whole Amazon ecosystem is just,
and you found
sometimes
it's been like a day in, day out effort. Someone's got to be on
someone's
that.
touching it every day. They're not spending 8 hours a day because, we only have, half a dozen brands on there. I think 19 different SKUs, but no, we you're touching it every day. You're looking at it every day. And we have a team now that I would say is expert at it. So, another competency that we've been able to build internally. We do a lot of things internally. And I think that's it's difficult to build that infrastructure, but once you have it, it's a competitive advantage. Sometimes we can move faster. It's one of the reasons we picked up a lot of business during COVID because, there were supply chain issues, there was personnel issues, but because we're able to do a lot of things internally, we could react quicker, I think, than a lot of folks. So we did pick up a lot of business that, the reason we picked it up is because the other people weren't shipping.
They couldn't get their act together.
They couldn't do it.
So, there's something, there's always this push and pull I find in so many different areas of life between diversification, which reduces risks, spreads it out across multiple areas, But then the more you diversify, then you lose specialization, which can bleed into your competitive advantage, can sort of make you sort of seem like jack of all trades, master of none, or
Right.
you can't be everything to everybody. We know all the sayings that go forth. So how do you think about enough diversification to mitigate risk and provide opportunity, while at the same time maintaining a critical mass of specialization that you don't lose value in the market?
Well, I mean, if you look at the way we did it, it was really a diversification of, where we market our products, not so much a diversification of capabilities, right? I mean, so as an example, I came from the solid dose world. I made pills. That's maybe a natural progression for some people. Hey, we make things in tubes and liquids. Liquids was a diversification for us. We got into the nasal spray business. That was a big effort. That was brand new for us. We did that over the past 5 years. But it was still liquids. We could use our same mixing systems. It was kind of a natural progression. So I think, and we've looked at it. Oh, okay, do we try to go into powders or tablets and that's where I say, I'd say, well, that's going to spread us too thin. It's going to be too difficult for us to do that. So, we chose to diversify in, again, really where we market similar products, prescription toothpaste, consumer toothpaste, the Neosporin duplicate or triple antibiotic. Be careful. I don't want to say Neosporin that goes in a tube. It can go in, our tube. It can go in different customers' tubes. So we diversified our customers and where we market. The same kind of core. Our core competency remains the same. Because frankly, it's such a huge investment. I know to say, okay, we're going to build a solid dose facility. It's just we can't take it on. We're not private equity backed.
Plus, what you're saying is it's not even the same specialization. Like if I'm filling tubes with someone else's stuff or my stuff, or the lift was learning how to market it on Amazon, but the core competency of making the products and all that is already what you're doing. So
how do we market the prescription products? Okay, well that's where we found a partner who's again expert at it. We didn't say we're gonna build that team ourselves. So we're going to hire 30 people to try to, sell directly into pharmacies and the PBMs. We knew that was too much of a lift for us. So we found the right partner to work with. Mm-hmm.
So it's been interesting, and it sounds like you've obviously been very successful in the end. How much time did you spend doing like detailed business strategy plans on those like millions of dollars of investments versus relying on sort of your instinct and business knowledge?
Well, I mean, I always had to create a business case, for our board, our banks. So, I'd say a fair amount of time kind of studying that. The bigger amount of time was even once we made that decision, okay, so we're going to spend this money. Who do we spend it with? Where do we go? Who's, what is the right partner? Because choose the wrong partner and might as well light the money on fire. We had that experience,
Did.
So I mean we had some real missteps in a couple pieces of really key equipment that it didn't go well, So once we found partners that were reliable, it's who we work with now. We're not out there. I'm not going to try to save 10% on a machine and go with an unknown quantity because
you could lose that 10%.
We could lose that 10% in no time.
Yeah.
And once you start standardizing on a certain manufacturer, even if you're buying different pieces of equipment, it's you're standardizing on that style. It's easier to integrate that. Your people know it. So we've chosen a few partners that we almost without exception work with exclusively. I'm not going to take a risk trying to work with somebody else.
Well, I'm glad I asked the question because you said something that I just want to pull on. I know we're getting late on time, but it didn't all go well. It's so funny that we're telling the story, and like if someone's sitting back listening to this, right? It just sounds like this like fairy tale. Made the decision, we made the hard move, we invested, all this, 9 figures or whatever, and we're trying to get it in here, and it all worked out. And you just sort of open, I think, the curtain to say, no, it wasn't that easy. We had some missteps, but yet you persevered.
Well, you kind of have to. I mean, so it
Half pregnant, you got to go all the way in.
yeah, you can't. The problem with all this automation we've done. If I'm putting a new production line in, it takes a year to build. It's not like, I want it. You go to the dealership and I want that one. No, it takes, it's all semi-custom.
Sure.
And you kind of have to make it work. But, you learn your lesson. I mean, I'm running one piece of equipment now. It was one of the early investments we made because, again, we hadn't worked with anybody, Unfortunately, it was one of the first U.S. manufacturers we worked with. It was an absolute failure, We actually had to modify the machine ourselves to get it to run the way we needed it to. Luckily, we had the expertise in-house to be able to do that. But, that was not great. And so what happens? You make commitments to customers. You take on new business. You've got this,
How did you deal with the internal pressures, right? I mean, you have a family ownership you got to report to. There's a board. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, how did you navigate those waters in the face of significant challenges?
For me, when I took the business over, things were not that rosy, let's say. So there was a lot I had to deal with. I had to learn things that I'd never, I was an operations guy, there was a lot of financial things that I had to manage, managing the whole company. There were some challenges there. And my approach was, really rely on my network. I had a good network of resources I could access. And I just, if I step back and kind of looked at everything in totality, it just gets overwhelming, right? So I just take little chunks and I say, okay, this is what we're working on now. Okay, we need to get this to this stage, and then we can worry about those 10 other things that everybody's like, oh my God, but what about this, that, and the other thing? Just concentrate on this. So I just tend to break things into small chunks and work through those, and that served me well because, then working 80 hours a week that helped too, but.
Like good old elbow grease.
Yeah, and I'm very hands-on. I all these equipment. I'm the CEO of the company. Sometimes I'm up there with a wrench in my hand because that's what you have to do. So it's what I like. It's a challenge. The marketing part of it, it was all new to us, right? We're not a big marketing company, but we still had to figure out social media and the Amazon part. I worked with my team and, practical application to me, you can get all the training in the world, doesn't matter until you actually start doing that job. You make those mistakes, you learn from them, and you just, you've got to get your hands around it. You got to do it. You got to, you cannot, a company like mine especially, you can't lead from a distance. Mm-hmm. You got to get in the nitty gritty, dirty, rough parts sometimes. And luckily it's kind of what I liked anyway. It's where I came from. So it for Sheffield, we didn't need an expert marketer. We didn't need, an expert M&A guy, where, a lot of people in my position come from the sales world, the marketing world, finance. Relatively few CEOs come out of operations. And for this company, that's exactly what we needed. So
somebody who kind of likes being in that nitty gritty. Mm-hmm. When you see those failures are the wrong word. When you run into those challenges, seems like you just kind of plow through them. Don't let yourself get sort of sidetracked, disoriented. Stay focused on the thing and just find a way. You got to focus
on a solution. Yeah. You got to focus on the goal. And our goal is we got a customer. And some of our customers. Look, we deal with 3M and CVS, the biggest companies in the world, right? If we don't ship our product, they don't care. They just fine us. Yet some of our customers, they're single brands, right? We hold their fate in our hands. If we screw up, if we don't get them product, if we give them a substandard product, they're out of business. They're small companies. So you got to focus on that customer. Who and it's hard sometimes when you're dealing with these big giant companies. It's a bureaucracy. It's like dealing with the government. But, you know, when you've got those smaller customers who are really relying on you, you got to get the team focused on it. That's what we try to do, you know.
Seems like you're doing a heck of a job. So before we kind of go into some wrap up questions, I did want to mention that you brought some samples for people that are just listening, not watching. You brought some samples, and the thing I found super fascinating, in addition to the fact that you make chocolate toothpaste, which I just think is amazing,
Big seller.
I bet it is. My kids are going to love it. But you're back to aluminum tube toothpaste. And
Yep.
I just found that so interesting. What's old is new again. I just wonder if you could, I mean, what's going on with that?
Well, you know, there's, I mean, the whole brand really is, you'd call it retro.
Yeah. The look is
and
retro.
That's intentional. That's
Yeah.
intentional. Because, you know, a lot of, you know, even like millennials and younger folks, I mean, look at what's gone on with, you know, shaving. You know, people are using straight razors and safety razors and bartending and, you know, craft cocktails. I mean, people want to feel like, you know, you're not just some mass-produced product. So, you know, the whole brand was kind of done that way. You know, it's authentic. You know, that's you know, we are the inventors of toothpaste. Still made here in the same, you know, town that the company was started in the U.S. But the aluminum tubes also, again, that's going back to basics, right? You know, it's actually a great package from a product quality perspective. There's nothing better than a metal barrier. You know, it's lined with a you know, there's not direct contact with aluminum. It's lined, but again, it keeps the product fresh. And also from a sustainability, that's the big word. You know, everybody talks about sustainability, but what does it mean? That's one reason why we went to an aluminum tube, because even a recyclable plastic tube presupposes that somebody's going to recycle it. You know, there's a statistic that says 80% of all aluminum ever, you know, refined is still in circulation. It is the most recycled thing on the planet, aluminum. Whereas plastic, nobody really, you know, the mixed recycling, a lot of times that just goes right in the dumpster. You know, it's kind of a dirty secret. But the reason is there's no market for it. Nobody wants used plastic. Aluminum, on the other hand, has a market. So we thought from an authenticity, product quality, and sustainability angle, there's nothing better than aluminum. So we just did that. We just really last couple of years started transitioning everything over to aluminum. And it's been pretty well received.
That's funny, man. The old innovation is new again. That's awesome.
Can't forget your past.
No, you cannot. Hey, so Jeff, I just wanted to ask you as we kind of wrap up here, some kind of classic questions. One is, if you had to do something other than be president and CEO of Sheffield Pharmaceuticals, you had to do something else, and it could be anything in the whole wide world, what would you do to spend your time?
Anything in the whole wide world. You know, I think I'd be like a distiller.
Really?
Or maybe like a you know, maybe have a vineyard or something like that. You know, I've always found that fascinating. You know, distilling is, you know, I always thought that would be really
make
neat.
some craft spirits.
Yeah,
I like
craft
it.
spirits. You know.
Do you have a favorite business book?
You know, I haven't been doing that much reading. The last one I read that I really enjoyed was actually a couple of years ago, and it was called "The Hard Thing About Hard Things."
Actually, reading that right now.
Great book.
It is a great book,
particularly as a CEO, and it resonates. You know, was it Ben Horowitz? I think.
I do not know the author, but I'm literally.
So that's the last one I read. It was actually
chapters in.
recommended to me by a friend of mine. I thought it was quite good. But
yeah, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, that is a great book. What's something, Jeff, that you learned early in your life or early in your career that you think's helped propel you to all the success you've had?
You know, somebody asked me the question once. It's going to be a long-winded answer. And, you know, when I took over as CEO, as I said, I was facing some real challenges, and real challenges in areas that weren't my forte, you know, finance in particular. And I got through it, and, you know, successfully. And somebody asked me once, well, you know, how did you do that? You know, because it's amazing that you got that done. And my only answer to that is I was just honest. You know, when I was dealing with partners, I said, this is what we can do. This is how we can do it. This is when we could do it. I wasn't, you know, I'm very direct. I'm not a salesman, you know, even though I am heavily involved in sales now. I don't have the flowery words and the, let's call it BS that a lot of people have. And some people don't like that direct approach. But to me, that's how I was successful. I'm honest. I'm going to give you a real answer, whether or not you like it, unfortunately. But I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. And that's how I got through that period. Because it's very tempting to say, well, I know this projection doesn't look that good. Let's just sandbag it. So, we got to get this financing done. But it never works out for you. You just disappoint people. And if your reputation is you disappoint people, you're not going to get very far. So just honest. And, I just tell people the way it is.
A lot more steak than sizzle.
Yes. Not a lot of sizzle with me. It's just a lot of steak.
That's good if you like steak, I guess, right? What's something, Jeff, that you learned later in life or later in your career that if you could go back and tell young Jeff, and if young Jeff would listen to you, would make a real positive impact on his life?
You can't do everything yourself. You need a team. You need a network. You got to leverage them. That was always a hard lesson because, I was always, particularly in my younger days, well, I'll just do it myself because no one else is going to be able to do it as well as me. That works when you have your responsibilities are here. But as you grow, if you don't learn that lesson quick, you're not going to have a team that wants to work for you. And you're also not going to be able to execute what you need to. So you leverage your team, leverage your network. You can't do everything alone.
Amen to that, Jeff. I'm going to leave it right there. Okay. Thank you so very much for coming on and sharing your story and your views. It's super interesting, and I really appreciate it.
I appreciate coming. I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by Compass MSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.